Hello, JJ Meets World fan. You are in for a real treat. If you like discussions about movies, specifically genres of movies and the things that Tucker and I like during them, well, good news. We've made an entire episode that's just about that. And we talk about previous episodes that you can go back and listen to. So we've put together a great weekend. So tell your aunt you're not going to make it to your cousin's wedding and just sit and marathon some JJ Meets World. Enjoy this. If you have arguments, we love to hear about them because that's why the internet was invented, to argue about movies. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
JJ, I've been on a J.R.R. Tolkien kick for the past couple of months.
The guy who founded the tire factories.
Yeah, exactly. And so I decided to do a rewatch of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, not the Hobbit trilogy, and the extended edition versions of those. So I got 4K copies of it because I wanted to watch it in full. Had a great time watching it. And it reminded me of my thoughts and feelings about that trilogy and how, of those 3 movies, Fellowship of the Ring, the extended edition, is my favorite, absolute favorite. I like Two Towers. I like Return of the King. I love Fellowship of the Ring. And as I was thinking about it, I realized that for me, I think for the sort of fantasy genre, kind of the version of it that Tolkien basically created, that Fellowship of the Rings is the greatest fantasy film ever made, period, in that genre. And so I thought, well, what would be my top movie in that genre ever made for other genres? And so I pitched it to you. Hey, I think we should use this as a springboard to talk about movies on an episode.
Yeah, about specific genre movies.
About specific genre movies. And you could, I guess, if you wanted to, try to make an argument for what would objectively be the tent pole, the best one. But I think that's really tough to make with movies because so many are made and they influence each other so quickly.
I would also say that to some extent, too, it's our favorite, right? So I think sometimes, like, especially film nerds get mad when you say the best,
right? Because
they're like, oh, but this didn't gross as much as this did, or this has a cult following for blah 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 blah.
It's about the feelings it gives me, and specifically Fellowship of the Rings, the extended edition, is the one that gives me all the feels, especially the first act. Love the first act of Fellowship of the Ring. And the introduction of Gandalf and Frodo in the Shire and learning about this way of life.
Everyone loves a let's get the gang together movie, which is what Fellowship of the Ring is.
It's a road trip movie, basically.
I remember the first thing that I really noticed when I watched the extended versions way, way back in the day, and it was like they put the extended versions out right before Return of the King came out in theaters, and then, of course, Return of the King had an extended version as well.
Right.
But the one where, like, Mr. Frodo, it's Mr. Bilbo's trolls, and you see the stone trolls. I was like, why wouldn't they have left this in the movie? Like, that's the problem with those extended is, like, you should have left this in, but there's no way. And you know what I found out a long time ago is that studios don't necessarily decide the length. Exhibitors decide the length. So when the movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks came out, the original edit of it was like 35 minutes longer.
Really?
And it's what they called a road movie. And it had like 3 other songs.
What?
And
this is one of my favorite Disney films. I had no idea about this.
It's so good. There's a great song that she sings called "A Solid Man" about a guy who fell into concrete.
So there's a fully produced extended.
There's not because everything's been cut and lost to history at this point.
How do you know it's good then?
Because they talked about all this great stuff that they had to cut out of it, like Don DeGrady, the guy who produced it, and the same thing happened with Mary Poppins too. And the reason is that once a movie hit a certain length, they called it a road movie, which meant that exhibitors couldn't show as many screenings in a single day.
Right.
And this is back in the day when the multiplex didn't really exist, and a lot of theaters had one screen only. And so maybe you had like a small second screen, but for the most part, you either got 5 screenings a day or you got 3. And there's a big difference between the amount of popcorn you can sell with those things. Yeah, if you buy the soundtrack to Bedknobs and Broomsticks, you can hear some of those other pieces, and they're not fully they're not completed because they didn't end up making it. But that was the thing, is the exhibitor's like, you got to cut. Mm-hmm. And there's a world where I'm like, well, they should have kept those extended editions together, but really it would have dominated. You would have ended up with one other movie showing in a multiplex. Now they have re-released the extended editions, and I know that people do go see them in theaters.
Yeah.
Now and bring a bag to pee in because how long is the extended?
It's like, I think each of the extended chapters is about 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was a long. I loved watching it, and I am also someone who has. I would have trouble probably going to a theater and watching a 4-hour movie because I wouldn't be able to pause it and do all the comforts of life I can do at home. But I have the appetite for it. I have the appetite to sit down and watch a long story as long as I can condense it. But regardless, just as a movie, I really don't find any fault at all with Fellowship of the Ring. Not only is the story itself just fantastic, and that's to Tolkien's credit. I mean, it's because of Lord of the Rings that you have Dungeons and Dragons in the first place. The idea of, you need to put together a crew of different people with different powers in a fantasy setting, and there's going to be the caster, and there's going to be the tank, and there's going to be ranged people, and all that kind of stuff. That all comes from Lord of the Rings. I'm going to paraphrase this great quote. I think it was Terrence McKenna, but I might be getting it. I'm going to edit that out. I don't know who said this quote. Famous author said it. Might be Terry Goodkind, but he said, Tolkien is to fantasy stories like Mount Fuji is to photography in Japan. And it's something to the effect of either Mount Fuji will be in the photo or Mount Fuji won't be in the photo as a deliberate choice of the person who took the photo, or you are in fact standing on Mount Fuji, right? That's just how present it is. And that's how present Tolkien is in all of fantasy writing. Anyways, so that movie is fantastic. I think the performances are sublime. I love how it builds tension. I love the fighting. I love the whole sequence of Moria. And I could even just watch just that movie and end it with Sam and Frodo going off alone, going, that's it. I don't need to watch the rest of this. I've seen enough of the story.
Let me give you a hot take on Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is like a couple. And they meet, and things are great. I like this, you like this. Oh my gosh, let's go apple picking. That's great. Every moment they wake up and look at each other, and that's all they need, right? And it's beautiful and it's fantastic. And all the other couples are like, man, we wish we could be like that couple. They're so great. And everyone else wants to be around that couple, and it's fantastic. And then they decide to get engaged. And, they are having to have discussions about things they've never discussed before. So now they're talking about intermixing their finances, and it becomes all about money. And money causes problems, and it causes fights. And before you know it, you no longer are the Lord of the Rings couple. You are the Hobbit couple. And then you become, unfortunately, the how they're going to get 2 movies out of Smeagol couple. And at one point you wish, you know what? They should have just broken up after they took that trip to Los Angeles and brought home all those Academy Awards. Mm-hmm. And they should have been done. Yeah. That is, to me, the biggest problem, is that everything that they're doing with this post, Return of the King is sullying.
Yeah. Have you heard of the M4 edit of The Hobbit? So it's this really popular fan edit that's actually always a work in progress. And there's a community of people that's been working on it for a number of years. And it's viewable. I haven't watched it yet, but it's out there with completely redone special effects to make it all happen. And they've condensed the Hobbit trilogies into a 4-hour movie. of just the stuff that's actually in the book The Hobbit. And apparently it is way better of a viewing experience than watching the actual full trilogy, which is atrocious. And so at some point I want to sit down and watch the M4 edit, just because love The Hobbit, and select scenes from that trilogy are fantastic, but they are in the center of this absolute nonsense that's going on forever. The Bilbo and Gollum scene in the cave doing riddles, perfect, absolutely perfect. A lot of the stuff at Rivendell with Elrond, awesome, right? Some of the stuff with the dwarves is really great, and some of it is utter shit, and you don't need to see it. So I would really like to watch that at some point. But back to the point, for me, in the genre of fantasy, which can be hard to define, but I think you understand what I'm going at.
Yep.
Wizards and magic and dragons and stuff like that.
By the way, there is, just so in case anyone's hearing this,
it's a ring wraith outside.
There, a ring wraith, and this one's name is Hoover, and it doesn't really get as much attention as the other ones. But keep going.
Yes. There's the Witch King of Angmar, and then his lieutenant Hoover. But for me, the best fantasy film ever made is Fellowship of the Rings, the extended edition, directed by Peter Jackson. What would you say is the best fantasy film ever made?
It would be Labyrinth.
Ooh, okay.
And here's what I like about Labyrinth. So fantasy is all about world building, right? And there are elements of our real world that influence different pieces of it, but there's like a fun, right? It's the things that we wish existed in our world that don't, right? And that's what the movie Labyrinth is all about. You know, Jennifer Connelly doesn't like her stepmom, and she wants to escape to this world of fantasy, and then you know, she's forced to go into it. And what Brian Froud and Jim Henson created, I think, is nothing less than a masterpiece. Now, of course, we know I'm a big fan of puppetry, especially Jim Henson stuff, and that's really good. And, you know, a close second is Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal.
Sure.
The Dark Crystal, to me, is as fantasy as it comes. And what's unfortunate is, you know, The Dark Crystal pretty much flops when it comes out. People don't understand. In fact, there was a time when my understanding is like that they weren't, so the Skeksis and the I can't remember what the name of the things that look like the other version, you know, the Skeksis are evil, and then the Mystics. And so they weren't going to speak English, they were going to speak this like otherworldly language, and they weren't going to subtitle it. And so you'd have to understand just by the visuals of what was going on. And I think a studio was like, no, sorry, unfortunately we can't do that. A more modern shout out would also be the film Stardust. Do you ever see Stardust?
I have, yep.
Stardust is one of those movies that just like hit right. The Princess Bride is on
that would be my runner-up.
The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
It's interesting because like the fantasy genre did exist, but really didn't have a lot going for it for a long time. Because I think, in a weird way, like the horror genre kind of absorbed a lot of those fantasy elements and those things that like go into it.
I mean, you could really argue, and people do make this argument, that you have fantasy and then you have almost every other form of fiction underneath it, including science fiction, including all these other variations of it, because you are creating an escapist, fantastical world that does not exist. We have sort of a division point of sorts where does it feel like it's present day or previous to our current day, and it's not reliant on technology, it's more reliant on things like magic and medievalism maybe, or fairy tales or things of that nature, where the mystery is on this planet, versus the future in science fiction-y where there's spaceships and other things. Doesn't have to be. And there's subcategories of that. I know a lot of people would argue that Star Wars is space fantasy or science fantasy instead of science fiction. But anyways, to me, it's for me, fantasy feels like sword and magic, and doesn't have to be medievalism, but some sort of proto-history as we know it.
You know, and to completely undermine your point there, you think of something like Alice in Wonderland.
Sure.
Clearly fits into the fantasy genre, right? But I think the reason why you don't associate it with it is because it doesn't have those elements you're talking about. The Tale of King Arthur, right? Based in historical fact, but uses a lot of fantasy elements, and so that feels to me like the idea of Merlin and all of these actually does feel like it.
I mean, there are kings and queens. There is what you could call magic, right? So there's mysterious forces at play. I think the world itself is fantastical. It reads to me like a fairy tale, so I would consider it fantasy. I'm more or less trying to throw some of the biggest things but it doesn't have to have swords or epic fantasy, which I think is what is referred to for Lord of the Rings.
There was a movie that came out a few years ago, and I can't remember the name of it, but it stars Will Smith, and it's
Men in Black.
No, but like if a fantasy
Men in Black
world,
2.
Yeah, no, and not Men in Black 3 either.
I wasn't going to say Men in Black 3.
Oh, and not Men in Black International. I don't know if he's got a cameo. But he plays an LA cop, and his partner is an orc. And it's where like the fantasy worlds are real, but we've continued to evolve into modern day times, and fantasy creatures are like a minority, right, and have like kind of been relegated to the slums and stuff like that. And so in the thing, they find a magic wand, which is extremely rare and like, ultra dangerous. It'd be like finding a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And Bright, that's the name of the movie. Yeah. And I remember watching that and being like, this is an interesting concept of seeing these elements in like the modern times.
Yeah, it's so what they did was they basically took the game Shadowrun and basically was like, well, what if that was, let's just take the idea and do it. But yeah, like sci-fi dystopian technology future where magic has come back. And so you're meshing the two things. So it's at some point, I think you got to go, it's mostly just fantasy. And the science fiction can kind of become more of we're actually focused on this idea of science being done, right? Star Trek is both science fantasy and science fiction, right? Because they're trying to place it in both worlds. So fantasy for you, absolute best film of the genre, Labyrinth.
I'm going to say Labyrinth.
For me, it's going to be Fellowship of the Ring Extended Edition. I want to pick a different genre now, and I want to not go straight to sci-fi.
That would be the easiest.
It'd be easiest. I want to go straight to comedy. Comedy as a genre is broad.
Yeah, it is. And don't forget, there's an episode previously that you ruined.
Yep.
That probably is the most talked about episode I've had from other people who threw that out there. Okay, so I'm going to be a real butthole on this one because I believe that the umbrella top part of a pyramid genre doesn't exist nowadays because we have so many niche genres that fit underneath the same thing. So, for example, someone might say, I love comedies, but they don't like romantic comedies or they don't like screwball comedies. And like really what they're saying is, oh, I like slapstick comedies like the Three Stooges.
Right.
And so to me, it's hard to pick. He's like, gosh, Captain Ron is a sailing comedy, Clifford is a forced perspective comedy at best. But to me, like if you had to say, what's a comedy you go back to over and over and over again and you could watch and watch and watch?
Like you're going to time capsule it out into space. And it's like, I can only have one comedy.
It's tough too because comedy is also a genre that has problems with aging. Something that we found funny in one era no longer is something that anyone would consider putting in a movie. For example, I love the movie Meatballs with Bill Murray. It's a camp comedy. There's another subgenre, camp comedies. It's a great movie, but there is some stuff in the way men treat women, like hiding under their bunks to, see them naked, that is not a 2024 like thumbs up type thing. Like we're not including that, and we're better for it. Like we can come up with smarter ways to do things like that.
Right.
And so I have to think really hard about something that like aged well, that that fit with it. So give me 1 second.
It's okay. I need clarification. I'm trying to remember. Was my number one pick Dr. Strangelove, or was it? What was the pick that I made that I got people angry, or was it Princess Bride?
It's you vetoed something because you had never seen it.
Is that what it was? I thought it was one of the ones.
Was it Planes, Trains, and Automobiles that you had never seen and you vetoed?
I don't. It's been so.
I'm pretty sure it was because then like they had a showing of it at the Fargo Theater, and I was like, "Hey, come to see this thing," and you're like, "No, that's okay." I was like, "But you just but."
I'm trying to. I can't remember what my number one pick at that time would have been, and I'm guessing it's probably changed from what it is now, and it does change over time. Like what?
It changes for me by the season.
Yeah. Like what could it be?
Ooh, I got a good contender here, but like keep going.
Well, I'm leaning towards Monty Python and the Holy Grail because I'm thinking of not just what partly I'm thinking about what comedy means to me, which is making something goofy with my friends, right? Like AJ Goes to the Dog Park has a lot of Monty Python and the Holy Grail in it. And the first time I saw that movie, I realized, oh my God, I didn't realize that kind of thing existed when I saw it, and how silly it was. Just the opening gag of the coconuts threw me into hysterics. Every scene with John Cleese as Lancelot, and the fact that they had to just come up with an ending, and so they just get them arrested before they can get to the Holy Grail. Like the police come in and all the havoc they've been causing throughout the entire film. That sort of meta narration of a film was something that still resonates with me today. So
and
it's probably got to be that.
Nobody's come close to recreating something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Even they did not come close to it. There are other films which are good, nowhere not even close to Holy Grail. Life of Brian is hilarious. Meaning of Life hilarious. Cannot touch Holy Grail.
To me, the beauty of Monty Python and the Holy Grail is I love a movie where you have multiple people playing multiple characters, but you never get them confused.
No.
Like,
yeah.
I've watched television shows where they have people playing multiple characters and they're so close to the other character they're playing. They don't even bother like throwing a funny wig on them or something like that to try and like...
The audience is totally bought into the conceit. Yep, we get it. It doesn't matter if we're seeing different... there's one actor playing multiple characters. We totally get what's going on here.
There's a certain level of... I think Monty Python constantly wanted you to identify with a single character in like some of these scenes. So I think of the scene where the Lord is telling his son that he's going to be stuck there, and he tells the guards like, you know, like, don't let him out unless I come and get him. And they're like, right, let him out even if you come get him.
Yeah.
Be like, no. Like, and then he's like, where are you going? Well, we're going with you. And like the frustration of that, you're supposed to identify with that Lord and like how frustrating this is. Huge tracts of land.
The Lancelot attack on the castle, I remember lying on the ground, bent over, laughing because I was in such hysterics.
My cousins showed me Monty Python and the Holy Grail for the first time ever, and they said, okay, here's what you need to understand. Everything in here is a specific like choice that somebody made. Like they meant for all of this to happen. And I remember in that scene where the guards see Lancelot running off in the distance and they keep cutting back to the same footage and he's the same distance away every time.
Yep.
And then suddenly he's there.
Yep.
Right? And it's flawless.
It's also an example of, you know, you could try to make an argument that Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a fantasy film, but really the fantasy elements are in service of comedy versus another film that might be a fantasy film that's got funny moments where it's comedy in service of the fantasy. And so I think because we have all these combinations of genre and there is no border, right, that you can really draw a line between, there's sort of these gradations of what kind of genre it is. You kind of have to go, what genre is this mostly in service of? What is the primary goal here? And I'm sure even that's a mixed bag. Like a creator can say, I want to do both. I want to make you laugh and be in service of the fantasy. Then I'd say, well, it's probably fantasy film then.
So I would have to go my number one being Young Frankenstein.
Solid choice.
Mel Brooks does such an amazing job.
Solid choice.
Crafting something that, truth be told, is, you know, the whole premise of Young Frankenstein is that it is a direct homage. It is, you could actually consider it part of those same films. I mean, they went so far as to find people who worked on the original Frankenstein movies and say like, hey, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, I got a garage full of some of the props still, and be like, bring them out. And The beauty of that movie is at no point does anyone turn to the camera and wink, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are taking it so seriously. And it's the reason why I think the best Muppet performers are like human performers are the ones who take it so seriously. Charles Grodin in The Great Muppet Caper, Michael Caine in the Muppet Christmas Carol. And so Young Frankenstein is just perfect. And anywhere they could work in a gag, they worked in a gag, but not to make anything suffer. Like they didn't have this weird, like, oh, we'll just go for this. Even like, he must have an enormous Von Stucker. Mm-hmm. And then the way Eugene
Levy, or not
Eugene Levy.
Gene Wilder.
Gene Wilder looks at him and like chews on his food for a second, goes, yes. It is just it's utter perfection, and that movie has held up really well, and it's because they did their genre so well. You know, it's a comedy, but it's also a horror film, right? You know,
right?
And it's classic horror. A couple things I want to throw on this list, though, like just throw on the pile for comedy that people should consider. When was the last time you watched The Birdcage? Because The Birdcage is a master class.
Just once. The only time I've seen it was when I was younger.
Oh my God, it is a master class in comedy. It is one of those movies where every single line of dialogue, every single moment is perfect. And you find yourself rooting for characters who are wholly unlikable in so many ways. And that's the beauty. Gene Hackman and Diane Wiest understood the job that they got for that. Certainly Nathan Lane and Robin Williams. I mean, you really feel like there is love between these two people, and they've been married together for so many years. And it's just Christine Baranski's in it. It's great. It's so good.
And my runner-up would be Airplane.
Nice, excellent choice.
Airplane, I mean, Zucker Brothers, and of all that screwball-y type of, it's not a screwball comedy. It's
that's a screwball comedy.
Is it a screwball comedy?
Uh-huh.
I thought a screwball comedy was an actually older term that dealt with like a different style, but I can't remember. But let's call it that. Any one that has followed that has been just a shadow of that very first one.
They did their version of parody. So like you could consider like what Mel Brooks does parody, right?
Yeah.
So he does a parody of Westerns. He does a parody of horror. He does a parody of Robin Hoods. Mm-hmm. But you could also consider them screwball comedies too, for like what the idea of a screwball comedy is like, this is so ridiculous. I can't believe it's happening. And certainly the Zucker brothers and Abrams like really, really knew what they're doing. By the way, I know I've talked about on this, but if you haven't read or listened to Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane, it is so worth your time. If you are anybody who creates anything, listening to these guys talk about how like, we just had to do it. You know, they have an amazing story about when they were doing Kentucky Fried Show, which was just like a stage show where they mixed all this, different medium together. At one point they built this giant nose out of plywood that was in front of their theater. And when people were waiting for tickets, the nose would go achoo, and it would like spray water onto people. So if you're waiting at the ticket line, you could get sneezed on. And they're like, so the show's happening before you even walk into the theater. Of course you should give these guys money to make movies. They're fantastic. Also, do you know they had nothing to do with Airplane 2?
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Like nothing.
Never even watched Airplane 2.
Oh, it's not bad.
Yeah.
Like it's a rehash of the first. Instead of like being just a regular plane, this is about people going like visiting the moon. Like it's a colony on the moon. And so they just do a lot of the same garbage.
What genre should we jump to next? I think we do 5 genres. We've done 2. We've done fantasy. We've done comedy. You go ahead and pick the next one because I picked the first 2.
I would like to do courtroom drama.
Ooh.
Yeah. Courtroom drama is one of my all-time favorite subgenres of films, and there's a lot of really good ones. So this thing, I would say, includes everything from 12 Angry Men,
probably Time to Kill.
Yeah. The 90s, the courtroom dramas in the 90s, it was big. You think of like A Few Good Men. How many people quoted, "The truth, you can't handle the truth."
Right.
And that comes from a courtroom drama. I'll go first on this one, and I'll tell you the one that I could watch over and over and over is a movie called The Rainmaker. It's based on a John Grisham novel, and it has a young Matt Damon in it. And Matt Damon is a kid who just graduated from law school and he hasn't taken the bar exam yet. And he ends up working for a lawyer who is played by Mickey Rourke, who is he's like a racketeer, like he's part of the mob. Like he owns a strip mall where his law offices are, but he also owns a strip club that's at the end of the strip mall. And he's crooked as can be, but he's the type of guy who would take on a young kid and like have him on there so that they've got, another lawyer. And he explains about how you go to the hospital and you walk around the rooms and you find someone who's been injured and you ask them how their injury happened and if there's something you can sue them. And their whole thing is they take like 40% of whatever your winnings are, but they don't charge you per hour to be in there. And Danny DeVito plays another lawyer, and they get involved in Matt Damon gets a client, and the client is a woman whose son died of a rare bone cancer, and the insurance company refused to pay out or even cover like an experimental bone marrow transplant, which could have extended or cured her son. And so it's David versus Goliath, right? Mm-hmm. It's this gigantic insurance company, and John Voight is their lawyer. And then he is, just this little guy. The Rainmaker is out of this world. It is so good. And it's the score for it. So it's set all down in
Louisiana?
I think it's Mobile, Alabama.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of Southern accents, but it's got this kind of interesting, like bayou kind of music that, like an old electric organ. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. If no one's ever seen The Rainmaker, watch it. In fact, I kind of want to go home and watch it right now. What about you? A courtroom drama that you really like?
Well, there's one that is it's a film that's got its foot in two different worlds, and I think I'm going to make that one my runner up just because of that. So I'm going to go with To Kill a Mockingbird.
Great. I was going to say Harper Lee really, because I would say a third of that movie takes place in the courtroom.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And leading up to the case itself.
Yep. And Gregory Peck and all of everything that goes with it. Absolutely fantastic film. The one I wanted to do as a runner up was actually Amistad, which has large portions that are courtroom drama-y. But really, I think the thing that hooked me the most about that movie was Anthony Hopkins' performance as John Quincy Adams in front of the Supreme Court. And they do a Hollywoodized version of the speech he gives. The actual speech he gave would have been much longer and very boring, I'm sure. And I don't even know what kind of liberties were taken with the retelling of that historical event. But Hopkins, as an actor, gives this beautiful monologue as an aged former president, elder statesman in front of the Supreme Court, talking about whether or not these guys from Africa were born in Africa or were they born in a slave state, right? Which is the thing that if they were born in Africa, then they need to be freed and they would be sent back by the laws at that time. And of course, this was leading up to the Civil War. Martin Van Buren was still president, and all this stuff was so other history is going on in the background of it. The performances of that movie are amazing, and I've watched that movie a number of times, but mostly for Hopkins' performance at the end as John Quincy Adams. But To Kill a Mockingbird, that's the courtroom drama. That is the courtroom drama.
You could also say the second episode of the John Adams miniseries.
Yeah.
Like if we're going to go with the Adams family there a little bit.
Because that's when he's defending the British soldiers, right? From Bloody Tuesday? Bloody Monday?
Tuesday, right?
Bloody Tuesday?
Bloody Tuesday.
I can't remember.
Right? Yeah. Bloody something.
Bloody
Day
Sunday?
of the week.
Bloody Sunday?
No, that's when the Vikings play. But bump. Thank you very much. Tip your wait staff.
That's football, right?
That's soccer. You mean American football? Courtroom dramas are great because that's the thing, right? Like you ratchet up the drama. You know that at the end of it, one is going to win and one's going to lose. And what's it going to be? it's great. It's a great genre of movie.
Courtroom dramas are so much better well lit than an actual courtroom.
Oh yeah, indeed. Also, they make it look like it's all this beautiful wood and stuff like that. And like every courtroom I've ever been in has been old carpeting.
Right. It's rare that the judge is just constantly hitting the hammer.
Right.
Like hey.
When I was 6, I asked for a gavel for my birthday, and my grandpa got it for me. Is that weird?
Because your grandpa was a judge, right?
No. He was my great grandpa was a mayor.
Oh.
I have a cousin who's a judge.
That's
now,
what. Okay, yeah, the Dawson side. Yeah.
A Civil Action, another great courtroom drama, and that one's got a cast that Dan Hedaya, William H. Macy, John Travolta's the lead in it. Like that's another like great courtroom drama. I also love and like they don't all have to be like dramas. I mean, Legally Blonde could fit in this, this as well.
My Cousin Vinny.
Oh yes.
But I would also say that those are comedies that are using courtroom drama as a tool to make comedy in the same way that Monty Python is using fantasy and historical fantasy and Arthurian legend to make comedy.
Your Honor, permission to treat the witness. Permission to treat her as a hostile witness. You think I'm hostile now? Wait until you see me later. Oh, so good, so good.
You picked the next one because I picked the first two.
Okay, so the next genre after that. Oh, okay. We'll do this for my sister. Movies that take place in a single day or single night.
Is that a genre?
It's definitely a genre.
Okay.
Because think about it. There's got to be at least we could name 20 movies right now, and so why wouldn't that be a genre?
I'm gonna have to pull up a list though because I can't. My brain isn't going straight to that takes place in a single day. So basically, movies that take place within a 24-hour period.
Right, bingo. That are like they may have like one scene that sets up like the next part of it, but that idea that so much happens, like so Can't Hardly Wait. Right, so it's graduation night, and it's the party that happens.
I'm getting a good list here, though. So,
right,
okay.
like there's great stuff in there.
Yep.
Suicide Kings. Do you remember that movie? That movie is really big in the early 2000s about like a kidnapping, and Christopher Walken was the head of a mafia.
How was Escape from New York number 11 on this list? Like, it shouldn't be.
Well, where's Escape from L.A.? That's another one that takes place in one night. Like, that's a great movie. You gotta surf, man. There's so many great movies that take place in that genre.
So do you have what would be yours then? Already?
I mean, I think Can't Hardly Wait is really good because you do watch like the change in these characters. And that's the thing. You have a movie where everything needs to happen in such a small amount of time, right? So you're not making small character choices. You're usually making rather big character choices. Right. Okay.
Oof. So, I mean, obviously we're gonna go for our personal favorite, right, of this list. And I from this one list I found online, I have a favorite from that. I want to check another list soon, but I think I know what I'm gonna go with.
Oh yeah.
And it might be a bit of a dark horse choice.
I mean, okay, so John Hughes clearly loved this genre, right? So you've got things like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Breakfast Club, goes on to change like Dazed and Confused based off of what he's doing there. Clerks.
That's not John Hughes.
No, I'm saying like and neither is Groundhog Day or neither is Dazed and Confused. Those are influenced by his use of that, like those pieces. Oh boy. Okay. So I'll take
Clue is technically in one day.
Yes, it is. Okay, I'll take, just from looking at a list, I'll take one that I don't think gets enough acclaim, but it's really good. Falling Down with Michael Douglas.
Ooh, interesting.
So Michael Douglas is just your ordinary guy trying to get to his daughter's birthday party. He and his wife are divorced, and he has a bad day. And it's about his bad day going across LA. And it includes things like him getting a bunch of automatic weapons and shooting up a store because they stopped serving breakfast at 10:30 and it's 10:32. It is the what would happen if a normal person snapped, right? Like the idea of like what a normal person can do in this situation. Speed would probably be also on that list of one of those movies that I could watch that all takes place in like a single like amount of time. But you've got something. You got your eyes lit up.
So first of all, I thought I was going to go with Clerks because I love Clerks. I love that it's just some dude who's like, I'm going to max out a bunch of credit cards and I'm going to make this film with my friends and I'm going to use exactly what I have access to. And parts of it are going to be because I need to hide the fact that I'm shooting at night. So I'm going to make it, there's a reason why the front window is blocked, all that kind of stuff. I love that. But I'm going through a list on IMDb.com of movies that take place in one day. And I don't know in what way they're trying to number this, because there's no way this can be a ranking. But at number 37, technically, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, takes place in one day.
That's great. That's a great one.
That's my best one, because that's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
I think that would be a contender for me in comedy, but it would be a very dark comedy, right? It's very dry. Peter Sellers stuff fucking rules, but he's his own kind of genre, right? And it's a very slow burn, and there's so many moments, not just with him, but everyone else in that. It's an absolutely brilliant movie, and it's gonna fit into a day. So Dr. Strangelove for me.
What about the second in the new Star Wars trilogy? That takes place in a day.
Wait, what? Attack of the Clones?
No. Like the new one. Not Rise of the Skywalker, not Force Awakens.
The
one that no one likes.
Well, not no one, but I don't like it.
The one where Laura Dern is the purple-haired general.
Yeah. What the fuck is that one called?
Yeah, the one that nobody
I'm actually
likes.
blanking on it right now. I can't even think.
The Long Day's Night is what they should call it. But like, someone was telling me recently, like, do you know what the plot of that movie is? Like the real thing in that movie is The Last Jedi. That's what it's called.
There we go.
It's about them running out of gas. Like, that's the whole thing, is like, they're like, oh God, we're going to run out of gas here soon. It's the first time we've heard about these starships needing fuel is when they're like, oh, we're going to run out of gas. Oh boy, we're in trouble now.
So we've done fantasy, we've done comedy, we've done courtroom drama, we've done movie in a day.
Yeah. What should we round it out with?
Oh, man.
How about, okay, do you want to go ultra specific? And there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
Star Trek as your genre.
Star Trek as my genre.
As your genre. What are you going to put up at the top
as the best Star Trek?
as the best Star Trek?
Oh, and I have to stick with movies?
Yeah.
Because I would have done the TV show of Next Generation.
Okay.
That would be my
And you've got a couple movies that are the Next Generation
none
cast.
of those movies would have been.
You don't like the Borg's like storyline?
They're fine storylines, but the movies aren't very good compared to the TV show. My absolute pinnacle Star Trek movie of all time is Star Trek IV,
The Voyage Home.
The Voyage Home. Which is weird for me because usually I want to stay in outer space. Usually I want to stay in the future. But my memories watching that movie growing up, I watched the original cast Star Trek movies as a kid before I ever even watched the old TV show. My Uncle Baseball, Uncle Paul, has been on the podcast before. Massive Star Trek guy. Had like every tape, and so I could watch stuff at Grandma and Grandpa's house all the time. But so I sat down and just marathoned the movies one week on VHS. And yeah, not episode 4, but Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, where they travel back in time to San Francisco because they have to get some humpback whales that can talk to an alien in the future. And they had all gone extinct. And the whole thing was just a message on whale conservation, basically. Which was very in at that time. It's not so in anymore. Not nearly as in as it was in 1980 whenever they made that movie.
I sneakily believe that Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is the fan favorite of people who are at the helm of Star Trek right now. Because if you watch Picard, there are allusions to that movie in Picard, and not that Star Trek doesn't reference other Star Trek, but this is the one I felt the most like they were like, hey, this is fun, isn't it? Like a little wink wink and a nudge nudge, and like if you caught it, like, yeah, congratulations, good for you.
Probably, and I always go to specifically the scene where Scotty is showing the guy how to make transparent aluminum. And he's learning how their computers at the time work, which don't use audio interfaces, and he thinks the mouse is a speaker and a microphone. Computer.
How quaint.
How quaint. Cracks his knuckles and starts to type up the code, the molecules as they mess with the space-time continuum to save their future, which we now know ends in a multiverse event. So it's actually probably a really sad movie because they probably fucked the future somehow.
Now, I think that my favorite scene is when Dr. McCoy is going through the hospital and he can't believe how, he's like, what's wrong with you? She's like, kid, need dialysis. He goes, God, how barbaric. And he cures her kidneys, and they find Chekhov, and they were because I think they're gonna do brain surgery on him, right?
Because he had fallen and had a really bad head injury of some kind when he was looking for the nuclear vessels. Him walking around 1980 San Francisco as a Russian national asking for the directions to the nuclear vessels was pretty excellent.
I mean, they did a great job. Double dumbass to you. There's so much that goes into making that a great Star Trek. And don't get me wrong, I like other Star Treks as well. I don't think that they're all great. I agree with you that most of the Next Generation stuff is not awesome. I think that they cheaped out so greatly on Star Trek Generations, where they bridge these two things together. If you go back and watch that, the set that they built on the side of the mountain for Malcolm McDowell's laser ray is so cheaply and cruddily done.
I'm trying to remember which of the movies, what the name of it is, where it looks like all the extras where they used a Target Spring catalog to get them all dressed because they're in these, or a JCPenney catalog because it's just a bunch of tans and khakis and stuff. Really, really bad movies, unfortunately. And I never watched past Picard season 1, so I haven't seen season 3 where they get the team back together. I've heard that feels like that should have been the last Next Gen movie.
It should have.
Haven't watched it yet.
But you know what? Sometimes you got to actually wait. That's the thing, is sometimes the good things to come to those who wait.
Next Generation is sort of one of my, I'm not feeling good, I'm going to put on something that makes me feel good.
I am a firm believer in that the reboot, the Calvin Timeline series, I think was one of the smartest things I've ever seen done, where you can completely respect what's going on and then start something anew. The idea that, James T. Kirk didn't want to become, a captain, that he was an asshole rather than this great shining figure that he was because of the things that took place in his life, his dad, dying in that, and bridging Leonard Nimoy between those two was really smart. I enjoyed that a lot. I liked the J.J. Abrams stuff. I forget who the guy
who did Aquaman did the third one.
And he did
I really liked the third one a lot.
And
it was the most like a classic Star Trek
yes.
story. And I think Simon Pegg was one of the writers on that too. Which
he was
probably a big reason why.
I think actually he did punch up on all three, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay. Because he's a huge fan himself, and him playing Scotty is just brilliant. Yeah. And giving him that little guy that looks like he's partially made out of a mollusk. Wonderful.
Is that Deep Roy? I think it is. I think it's Deep Roy.
Deep Roy, man, hanging out with Johnny Depp and now Simon Pegg.
Short Kings, we got it. We got skills too.
You know who he wants to do a movie with? Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, he had said that a couple of years ago. He's like, I'd like to do a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm like, that's a great idea.
I wish they would have followed up on that idea of doing a sequel to Twins,
triplets
with Eddie Murphy. Yeah. That would have been pretty fantastic.
Well, and rest in peace to all of Eddie Murphy's co-stars, John Amos, John Astin, and James Earl Jones, all within a month of each other. Yep. Yeah. Make someone watch out for Arsenio Hall. He might have troubles. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. What's your favorite genre of movies where they work at a magazine?